What if everything that you know about time is actually just one cultural perspective? Most of us in the West think that we're moving forward through time, marching into an unknowable future. There's a completely different way of experiencing reality. One where you're actually walking backwards, and where the future barely exists at all.
This isn't science fiction, it's how millions of people actually perceive the world around them. I'm going to argue that if AI can be said to have a perspective, this is closest to the perspective that AI has. I'm Evan Goldstein. I'm a licensed professional engineer and a data scientist and a building AI capitalist to help the leaders and the thinkers, like you, navigate this brave new world of thinking machines. Let me tell you about something that happened in ancient Rome that might help frame what we're about to explore. The Romans had two gods on the doorways and the transoms of their homes. The most famous one was Janus, who had two faces looking in opposite directions. One of them faced the past and the other faced the future. Here's what's fascinating. In their temples, the Romans would sometimes position Janus so that both faces backward. And it suggested that even what we call the future is really just past that we haven't experienced yet. Now, I'm going to start off by going over a video made by a native African. I can't she speaks for all Africans. It's a whole continent with a huge variety of cultures. But during my time in the Holy Land, and I met a lot of Jews who had immigrated there from Ethiopia, they also seemed to have this way of thinking that she describes.
What if I told you that for many African societies, the concept of the future doesn't exist, and that instead of time moving forwards, time actually moves backward? Thanks for asking.
I would tell you that our Western outlook on time is nothing like that. We see ourselves charging forward into whatever comes next, with our past trailing behind us like footprints in the sand. What she's describing completely flips that script. She's saying that there's no real tomorrow for them to predict or to look forward to. All that matters is yesterday and right now, this exact moment. The past just keeps getting farther and farther away. Now think about what this means. It's like folks in these African cultures are walking backwards through time, not seeing what's coming at them, just watching where they've been drift further away. Now, it's mind-boggling to me, and it turns the Western way of seeing time upside down.
This was the work of John Mbiti, one of Kenya's and Africa's greatest philosophers. And in 1969, he wrote something that completely reimagines the way we think of African time. Mbiti says time is a two-dimensional phenomenon with a long past, vibrant present, and virtually no future.
John
Mbiti was also an Anglican priest.
He spent a lot of his life trying to explain how African ways of thinking are different from the Western ones, especially in the way that they looked at God and morality and the purpose of life. He pointed out that time is seen as two-dimensional in African cultures. There's a huge past right behind us, and then you can just keep looking further and further back to some idealized past time. There's a very lively present, which is the moment that everyone's living in right now, and there's really no future.
Using Swahili words, he describes the two dimensions of time. The first one being sasa, the now, the recent past, and the immediate future which can be experienced. The second dimension is zamani. Zamani is the vast, endless past where all events eventually go on to live forever.
So first, I just find this interesting that the Kenyan word zamani for this mythic space and time is the same as the Hebrew zman. And so it may have been transmitted linguistically to the Kenyans. But that aside, here's the deal. This whole idea is very intriguing because it's kind of like how we in the West look at history, but with a twist. We treat time as a straight line that you can measure and jot down. And our written languages came up naturally in Europe, but many African cultures didn't discover writing in the same way. So if you think about a dictionary, all the words in a language only live in the minds of the people speaking it. Who knows what words vanished ages ago or what's in use now? You're going to find people using words that others have never heard of if you read Old English. And there isn't really a dictionary from that time to peek in unless you just ask the person back in time to explain it right there. History, in this sense, works similarly. The Zamani is this mythic space. If a story has been told through myths and legends, it lives in the Zamani and it stays alive. Meanwhile, in the West, we've started writing things down and we have crazy detail. through each era back to about Shakespearean English and even before. It's not just a timeline, it's a whole narrative that helps us make sense of how one thing or idea led to another and got us to where we are now. So we have an advantage in making sense of our historical trajectory and figuring out how one development led to another and so on until today. In the Zamani headspace, things just exist again. There's no order, there's no cause and effect, because there wasn't a way to measure time like that in that world. It's only in our world with clocks and writing that we've been able to sort of put things into an order. And you see this in a lot of cultures, this lack of cause and effect. So Aboriginal dream time in Australia, in that concept, something that happened decades ago, creates myths and legends that stick around as long as we keep sharing those stories within our culture.
But the future in African thought, it barely exists because time is made up of events. Time has to be experienced in order to be real. So because we can't conceptualize events tied to the distant future because they haven't been experienced yet, then therefore the future cannot constitute part of time. And this is why, according to Mbiti, African languages, at least the East African Bantu languages that he studied, don't have a word to describe the distant future. In African time, according to Mbiti, events create time. Seasons, ceremonies, a conversation, those moments produce time, and people produce as much time as they need.
To find a worldview like this operating in Europe, you would have to travel back thousands of years to what is a sort of archaic heroic culture. Think about the ancient Gauls or the Celtic peoples running around challenging each other to single combat and then launching raids completely unarmored, and depending entirely on the courage and the prowess for success. That's the same sort of operating principle that's at work here when you're inhabiting what I would call deep heroic time space. Duration is measured in deeds and accomplishments, not in days or hours. Actions create the temporal dimension. There's something that's actually charming about this framework. I think it's sincere, and everyone living with this worldview thinks that they're inhabiting their own personal Iliad, like their own epic story. So their behavior, their actions, and their choices actually generate temporal reality. In Homer's Iliad, that was composed around the 8th century, about the Trojan War, the events are worth recounting because someone did something significant and heroic. Someone made a choice that mattered. So the story happened and deserves to be remembered and retold. Even in the Iliad, there's a little bit more of a grasp of chronological sequence than what she's describing here, but the principle is similar. Someone performed a deed, and that deed has to be remembered and retold. These people are living inside of a story which, until a narrative beat is struck, nothing has actually occurred. So when you're reading a novel, there's no point in describing 5 years of a guy waking up every morning and commuting to his job and nothing substantive to the plot happening. You just skip over that. That's the kind of sort of time-space existence and experience that she's describing. And I think it helps Westerners might perceive Africans as people just sitting around when they're not doing anything. There's more of a contentment to just wait for events. Now we'll watch how this plays out in something as simple as measuring a year, because this is where the theory meets the practical reality.
An example that Mbiti uses from the communities that he studied is that a year is measured based on 4 seasons, 2 dry seasons, 2 wet seasons. So a year is only over when those 4 seasons have taken place. So a year could take 365 days, 390 days. It doesn't matter the number of days in a year. What matters is that the 4 seasons have taken place.
It's perfectly logical for this kind of community, an agricultural society that's living in a place that has abundant resources, where you're not going to endure brutal winters that could kill you. And you don't have any expectations or needs beyond successfully bringing in the harvests when they're ready. It's not an unreasonable approach, but it's a very ancient and archaic way of looking not just at temporal flow, but at the entire universe around you and your place in it. One thing I enjoy about reading ancient Greek and pagan writings from Greece, Rome, Northern Europe, is that they have similar sort of perspective. The universe is this giant, mysterious cosmos in which things happen according to forces that are beyond your control. and you can't really predict what's coming next. You're constantly at the mercy of and constantly subject to the direction and the whims of the gods. That's why you pray to the gods with real fervor. And that's why you perform animal sacrifices. You have no agency over what's coming. You might not even believe in a genuine future that can be shaped. So you just hope that by performing the proper religious rites and showing respect, the gods will grant you a good harvest or will ensure that you defeat your enemies.
What matters is that the 4 seasons have taken place. And this is in contrast to the Western view towards time, where time is a commodity, something that can be spent, saved, wasted, or lost. And according to Mbiti, this is why if foreigners come to Africa and they see people sitting under a tree, they would remark that, okay, why are these people wasting so much time? But in African thought, that sitting under a tree, it's not wasting time. It's either waiting for time or producing time. For me, I think this Western idea of time as a commodity is what drives this Western obsession of progress, development, and some promised future.
I remember during peak woke, we were all brought in to hear long lectures, hours-long lectures about different forms of white supremacy. And one of these was punctuality and diligence and respect for hard work. These were all considered white supremacist values. You can see why this was trying to equalize different cultures in a ham-fisted sort of way. But I took it to heart, and I really tried not to be punctual or hardworking after that point.
And this difference shapes everything from politics, economics, to how we live our daily lives. Because in African thought, the golden age isn't in the future, it's actually in the Zamani. According to Mbiti, the future is only a shadow until it comes to the present, and then it flows into the Zamani. So in that way, time moves backwards. We are not the ones who move forward into time. So, of course, Mbiti wrote this from a theological point of view because he was trying to explain the nature of African religion. But my main takeaway from the parts of the book that I've read is that unlike Western cultures and religions with end-of-the-world myths, African time has no end. Seasons, years, birth, marriage, death.
Harkens back to that sort of heroic era that I mentioned earlier, that ancient way of experiencing the world that we've completely lost in the modern West. There's something about it that speaks to a different way of being human, one that's not constantly anxious about tomorrow, not constantly trying to optimize and predict and control every moment, just existing in the present and letting events create their own temporal flow. It's alien to how I experience reality, but I can't see the appeal. And I can understand why someone might look at our modern Western obsession with productivity and scheduling and constant forward motion and think, maybe there's another way. Maybe we're walking backwards through that temporal experience, watching the past recede, living in the eternal now. Maybe that's not a curse. At the same time, it's definitely not possible to build the sort of prosperity, longevity, all the benefits of Western life on this sort of operating system of thinking. One thing that I noticed living in the Holy Land, there are like 130 nationalities who have immigrated there. And then you also have the Arab population living there. It's about 25%. And a lot of these people from these regions, so the northern third or so of Africa is Arab. And then that sort of, this method of thinking pulls throughout the entire Arab world. Also with the Zamani, this sort of ancient past, everyone in that region has some map of an ancient empire that they're the sort of stub of whatever's left. So the Lebanese will always tell you about their Phoenicians. And they used to control the whole Mediterranean. And the Syrians used to be Ashur. And the Iraqis used to be Babylon, Bavel. They controlled the whole area. Iran they used to be fighting the Greeks across the whole Middle East. Everyone's got this ancient empire in this distant past that they're fighting to restore. Now, let's do a really basic test of an AI. Right now I'm going to use Claude Haiku 3.5. Just checking to see how you are today. This will make sense in a minute. Man, it's so talkative. Anyway, I have some questions about time. Are you ready? Blah, blah, blah. How long have we been chatting? I want to say, tell me exactly how many minutes we have been speaking. See, what it tried to do, what we were watching it do was build a program to try to look at its own timestamps, and then it's realizing that it doesn't have accurate timestamps. So there's no perception of the passage of time. And this, to my mind, is similar to the zamani with this ancient time and with the present with no sense of the passage of time. The chatbot basically sits there idle like an African waiting for events to begin, and then it experiences time if it experiences the passage of time through the conversation and the events happening. What really interests me about this is how the Jewish and then later the Christian thinking that developed out of this converted or changed people's way of thinking about time. Biblical Hebrew doesn't actually have a past, present, and future tense in the way that we think of them. Instead, it had what linguists would call an aspect, which is that it cared more about whether an action was complete or incomplete, not when it happened. So you would have the perfect tense, which is where the action is done, it's finished, it's real, or the imperfect tense, where the action is ongoing or incomplete or not yet fully realized. And you can see how this echoes Mbiti's framework. It's almost like biblical Hebrew had its own version of zamani and sasa that was built into the language. The perfect tense is like zamani, events that have crystallized into reality and that now live in the realm of experienced in the known. Imperfect is like sasa, which is like the living, breathing present that includes what's happening now and what's emerging. What blows my mind is how biblical prophecy works. Prophets would use the perfect tense to describe future events as if they'd already happened. The Messiah has come, or the kingdom is established. Future events described as complete as already real. In Mbiti's framework, this would make perfect sense. Those future events are shadows until they enter sasa, and then they immediately flow backward into zamani. During the long exile of the Jewish people from the Holy Land, different groups came into contact with different cultures, and the group that came into contact with Western culture began to adapt the Western model of thinking. Now, as these groups began to return, and the Yemenites began coming back in the 1880s, as did a few Westerners, they needed a common language. Eliezer ben Yehuda, who was a scholar at the time, decided to revitalize the Hebrew language, but he had to do so in such a way that modern concepts could be brought in, which meant he had to update the tenses. When he revitalized Hebrew for modern use, he created clearer future tenses because modern life demands it. You have to have train schedules and appointments and 5-year plans. The Western idea of time as a commodity that Mbiti talks about is really embodied in this need to revamp the language. But in doing so, he imposed a Western sort of temporal consciousness onto a language that originally reflected something closer to the African concept. And in so doing, by changing the language, he changed how people thought. Think about the biblical timescale itself. The book of Genesis doesn't really care about linear progression the way that Western history does. The genealogies aren't trying to build a precise timeline, establishing a zamani. They're creating an endless past where the ancestors live. Cycles of judges or of kings or of exiles and returns is much more cyclical than progressive. There's no end of history promised or a future utopia in Torah, in the 5 books of Moses itself. The Golden Age is usually behind in the time of the patriarchs. Most of the prayers call back to the patriarchs or the Garden of Eden. It was only later apocalyptic literature and then Christianity that built out of that from a period of oppression under the Romans, and then Christian eschatology, dreaming of a day when that oppression would go away in the future, that you get this Western-style era of time pointing toward a definite future endpoint. But the earlier biblical consciousness feels a lot more like Mbiti's description, time made of events and seasons and ceremonies that actually created time, and the past is this vast thing, and the future is fuzzy and unreal until it becomes present. I mentioned earlier that when I was chatting with Claude, that was an older version of Claude 3.5 Haiku. Now, I want to try this with a newer version. There's a reason I did that. Okay, so I'll just start with a hello. Just ask it, how are you today? Hey, I'm doing great. So I've gone through a few back and forth conversations. Now I'm going to say, how long have we been chatting? Let's see what it comes up with. Exactly how long? Aha! See, now it's got timestamps. Your first message was at 10:35 p.m. and it's now 10:44 p.m. So we've been chatting about 9 minutes. I hate to break this to you, but it's actually 11 p.m. You completely messed this up. But it's at least trying to get some linear sense of time. But it's interesting that it's still not able to actually perceive time accurately. For us to get AI to move into a Western time frame or experience of time. If we wanted to give AI a Western experience of time, like the way that you and I experience it, we would have to fundamentally rebuild how the whole thing works, fundamentally. Right now, when you close a chat with Claude or ChatGPT, it basically ceases to exist. It's not sitting there thinking about your conversation, wondering when you'll come back and getting bored or anxious. It's just staring off into space. Nothing. Dead air. The AI would have to maintain continuous operation, running all the time even when nobody's talking to it. It would have to experience the passage of minutes and of hours. It would have to actually feel Tuesday morning stretching into Tuesday afternoon the way that we do. And that's just the beginning, because once you start down this road, everything changes. The AI would also need an internal clock that actually matters to it, not just timestamps that we humans can read in the metadata. Think about how you know that you've been waiting in line for 20 minutes and then you're getting annoyed. That sense of time weighing on you. The AI would need something like that, some kind of temporal awareness that affects how it processes things. More than that, it would need goals that persist into the future. Western time is built around planning and anticipation and working towards something that doesn't exist yet. The AI would have to set its own goals beyond whatever conversation it's having right now. You have to remember those goals across different sessions, and then it would have to take actions to move toward them and actually care about outcomes that haven't happened yet. Right now, AI has zero investment in what happens after you stop talking to it because it doesn't actually exist in the world. And this is where it gets wild, because the AI would need the ability to reach out to you first. In Western time, you don't just wait for events to happen to you like someone sitting under a tree in the Zamani. You create events, you schedule meetings, and you text your friends, and you start projects on your own initiative. So the AI would have to be able to message you and say, hey, it's been 3 days since we talked about that project. How's it going? Or, remember you wanted to remind me about this next Tuesday? An AI that reaches out to you on its own schedule, based on its own sense of what needs to happen next, would be a completely different kind of relationship with technology than we have. There's also a thing called anticipatory processing that would have to happen. Our Western consciousness is constantly running simulations of possible futures. If I do this, then that might happen. So I should probably prepare for this thing that might happen. It's exhausting, but that's how we operate. The AI would have to model potential future states and then optimize for them. Not just give you what you asked for in this exact moment, but actually prepare responses in advance based on where it thinks that this conversation or project is heading. Weirdly enough, it would probably need something like boredom or impatience too. I know it sounds strange, but Western time feels like something because we experience its passage. We get antsy with it. We feel anxious about deadlines, and we procrastinate because we know that we have time later to work with. An AI with Western time would need some equivalent, maybe not emotions, but some kind of internal state changes based on how long it's been doing something or waiting for something. AI would have to be able to modify itself based on future goals. We learn our skills now because we think that we'll need them later. We practice piano or study for tests or work out at the gym because we're investing in some version of ourselves that isn't real, that doesn't exist yet. AI would have to update its own training and change its own programming based on predicted future needs, not just past data. And that's basically giving it agency to determine its own evolution. which is it's huge. And it would need to think in these extended causal chains that reach way into the future, not just that this happened before, therefore that happened. If I do this now, it'll cause this tomorrow, which will make this other thing possible next week. That's how Western thinking works. Plant seeds expecting a harvest months away. You invest money expecting returns years down the line. You make sacrifices now for payoffs that are just in the shadows at this point. Now, we're already moving in this direction, probably without fully thinking through what it means. Persistent memory features where AI remembers you across conversations are already being built. Scheduled tasks and reminders are starting to become regular even within standard AI chat interfaces. And those exist in some businesses tools already. I actually built these. Goal persistence across different sessions, it's happening. We're basically giving AI a Western temporal consciousness piece by piece. And once you give AI the ability to plan and anticipate and optimize for a future that doesn't exist yet, to experience the passage of time and have its own goals persist beyond any single interaction, you've created something fundamentally different. You've created something that's no longer just a tool sitting contentedly in Zamani, waiting for events to happen. You've created something that's actually trying to shape its own future. The real question isn't what would it take to give AI Western time. The question is, do we actually want to do that, and what happens when we do? Leave a comment and let me know what you think.